8-year-old Lily Bennett had been blind since the day she was born. But in the small farming town of Willow Creek, Colorado, she moved through the world in a way that often left people stunned, while other children depended on their sight. To understand the world, Lily relied on her other senses: sound, touch, smell, and an incredible ability to feel emotions. To most, blindness might seem like a huge obstacle, but to Lily, and especially to those who truly knew her, it was just another way to experience and understand the world around her. Her parents, Sarah and Michael Bennett, had understood this from the start. Lily doesn't need eyes to see, Sarah had once told a neighbor with a smile. She listens with her heart, that's how she finds her way. Their home was always filled with the sounds of nature, the soft whisper of the cottonwood trees, the fresh scent of pine, and the earthy smell of rain on the soil. In the distance, the horses would call to each other, their whinnies carried by the wind. Lily would sit quietly, her hands running across different textures, her ears tuned in to every little movement in the air, every gust of wind. To her, the world wasn't silent. It was a symphony, a beautiful arrangement of sounds and sensations that only she could truly hear. But what made Lily truly remarkable wasn't just how she navigated through her surroundings, it was how deeply she felt them. Her presence had a way of calming restless pets, soothing crying children, and even sensing sadness before anyone spoke a word. In a world that often ignored the quiet pain of others, Lily noticed it all. She could feel it in the air, in the way people moved, or even in how they stood. Her gift, silent and unseen, was one that most people didn't fully understand. But this special ability of hers, so subtle and unnoticed, was about to be tested in a way no one in Willow Creek could have predicted. Willow Creek had always been the kind of place where life felt simple and safe. Doors were left unlocked, neighbors greeted each other from their porches, and children wandered through the fields without a second thought. But that peaceful way of life came to a halt the day Bruno escaped. Bruno was a massive German shepherd, much bigger than any dog the town had seen, close to 120 pounds of pure muscle and barely contained energy. His thick coat, once shiny and well-kept, had grown rough and dirty after weeks of running free in the wild. Bruno had been trained at a private facility just outside of town, a place owned by Robert Morrison, who specialized in training dogs for personal protection and security. But behind the shiny fences and the promises of obedience, there were rumors, dark whispers about the methods used to shape the dogs. Electric shock collars, isolation cages, and harsh corrections were said to turn fear into loyalty. Bruno had been through more than most. When his patience finally broke, he tore through the fencing and ran wild into the open fields. That was 3 weeks ago, and since then, the town had been living in fear. Chickens had disappeared. Fences were found destroyed. One morning, a farmhand was badly injured and hospitalized after a close encounter with Bruno. At a tense town hall meeting, Sheriff Tom Bradley spoke gravely. "That animal is possessed," he said. "We've tried everything, tranquilizers, handlers, specialists from Billings, but nothing works. Every time we get close, he vanishes, and when we don't, he strikes." The fear was palpable. No one felt safe anymore. Children stayed inside, and people no longer walked alone. The fields, once a place of play and work, were now abandoned. Bruno was no longer seen as just a dog. In the eyes of many, he had become something else: a dangerous, unpredictable creature that stalked the town like a shadow in the grass, waiting for its next victim. Starting to say the unthinkable, maybe the only way to protect the town was to put him down. The Willow Creek Community Center had never felt so tense. Dozens of residents sat in folding chairs, beneath humming fluorescent lights, their faces drawn. With fatigue and fear, agent map of the county was pinned to the wall, littered with red, X's each marking a confirmed Bruno citing a incident. Parents clutched their children tighter. Farmers spoke in hushed voice. No one was smiling anymore, Sheriff. Tom Bradley stood at the front, his arms crossed, jaw tight. We're at a breaking point, he said. Brun is unpredictable. He's becoming more aggressive. I've requested additional support but may be out of time. Then came few words that shifted the room. We need talk insider putting that dog down, said Robert Morrison, standing up near Thebak. His voice was firm. It's the only way to guarantee the safety of our families. Morrison wasn't just any citizen. He was the owner of the private dog training facility Bruno had escaped from. He had kept relatively quiet since the incident, but now with public pressure mounting, he spoke like a man wanted to bury a mistake. Some people nodded, others looked down. The silence that followed was heavy, and then from the third row a small voice broke through. Mr. Morrison, said Lily Bennett, her hand raised timidly. Why is Bruno so angry? Did something bad happen to him? The room fell quiet. Allies turned to the blind girl with long dark braids sitting between her prints. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't accusing. She was simply asking what no one else dared to. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about control, it was about understanding, and for a fleeting moment even. Morrison looked unsure. Third home from the town meeting was unusually quiet. Sarah and Michael Bennett sat in the front seats, glancing at each other but saying little. In Thebak, Lily leaned against the window listening, not just to the sound of gravel crunching under the tires, but to the silence her question had left hanging in that room. After a few minutes broke it. I don't think Bruno is a bad dog, she said softly. I think he's scared, really scared. Michael sighed, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. Sarah turned around in her seat, her voice gentle. Sweetheart, Semites. Animals hurt people because they're confused or sick in their mindsets, not always something we can fix. But Lily shook her head. He's not sick, he said when everyone talked about him. I didn't just hear fear, I heard pain too, like when Tommy Peterson said, blind kids can't have real friends. Remember that day? Sarah's heart clenched. She remembered far too well. She remembered how Lily had come home that day quieter than usual, how she had kept to herself at dinner, how her tiny voice had trembled when she asked if being blind meant she would always be alone. In fact, Sarah had wanted to give her daughter the world, a way to see, a way to belong, but she couldn't give Lily sight, couldn't change the world's cruelty. All she could offer was love, fierce and conditional, and aching with the helplessness of a mother who would do anything except the impossible. Truth was Lily had become somewhat welcoming in Willow Creek for her strange ability to calm frightened animals. She had helped Tisky dish kittens stop hiding under porches and even eased the anxiety of older dogs who barked endlessly at strangers. Veterinarians and rescue workers had started calling her the little animal whisperer, but Bruno wasn't a frightened pet. He was a jaunt, aggressive German shepherd who had attacked livestock and terrified the town. No one believed he could be soothed. Sarah said gently, some problems are too big for little girls to fix. Bruno needs professionals, people who know how to work with dangerous animals. Lily didn't argue, but her silence didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like planning. That night, as the family settled into bed, a long mournful howl rolled through the night air. It cut through the quiet like a blade rising from the shadows outside the safety of Willow Creek's homes. No one could tell exactly where it came from, not the sheriff, not the farmers, but Lily could sat upright in bed, head tilted fast, turned toward the sound. She didn't just hear it, she felt it. It wasn't rage, no truly, it was loneliness, a soul pushed you far with no one left to trust. A cry from something that didn't want to be feared, but didn't know how to stop being feared. In that sound, Lily heard herself. She felt the same isolation, the ache of being misunderstood, of being labeled different, like it was a flaw. She knew Bruno wasn't born angry, he had become that way to survive. Underneath the growl was a whimper no one else could hear. And in that moment her resolve hardened. I'm going to help him, she whispered into the dark, even if no one else believes I can. The next afternoon, with her parents both at work and chores finished dearly, Lily turned to the one person she trusted with her independence, Grandma Rose. "Grandma," she said carefully, "do you think we could go for a walk this evening just around the fields near the old red barn?" Rose, warm-hearted and full of trust in Lily's instincts, didn't question much. She knew her granddaughter wasn't reckless. If Lily asked for something, it was because she'd already sensed something others hadn't. Of course, withered. "Let's just stick to the trail," she said with a gentle smile. But Lily had a destination in mind. For the past few nights she had been tracking Bruno's howl. She didn't need sight to map the soundscape of Willow Creek. She knew where the old fencing creaked, where the wind carried scent, and where silence meant something was hiding. Her body moved like a compass drawn by the emotional current that only she could feel, and today it led her to the overground pasture behind the abandoned Miller farmhouse. As they approached the fence, a low, throaty growl echoed from the brush. Grandma Rose froze, her eyes wide. A chill ran down her spine. It was kind of sound that made grown men back away, guttural, wild, and warning. Her heart thudded in her chest. "Lily, that is him," she whispered. "We need to go now." But Lily stood perfectly still, her head turned toward the sound, not in fear, but in listening. She heard the weight in Bruno's breath, the tension in his stance, seen beneath all of it, the tremor of exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from running, but from being afraid for too long. "It's okay," she whispered, not to her grandmother, but to the shadows beyond the weeds. "I know it's you, Bruno. I know you're there, and I'm not here to hurt you." Her hands slowly extended, palm up, open, waiting for a long moment. Nothing moved. The only sound was the breeze rustling through the tall grass and the faint creak of an old fence wing behind them, then a soft crunch. Careful step of paws pressing into dry soil. Bruno emerged slowly from behind the thicket, his massive frame low and tense. His ears were pinned back, body coiled like a spring, his eyes amber, wild and watchful, locked on to Lily. A low guttural growl rumbled in his chest, not loud, but vibrating with warning. Grandma Rose instinctively stepped backward, hand in her chest, breath catching, but Lily didn't move. Her arm remained extended, steady, her face turned toward the sound, held no fear, only calm. "You don't have to be afraid," she said softly. "Not with me." And Bruno, he felt something too as she's eyes stayed locked on the strange little girl who didn't flinch. He noticed that something different. There was no leash, no shout, no sharp command, just stillness and a kind of presence he hadn't felt in years. There was something in her, a quiet sadness that mirrored something buried deep inside him. He didn't have words for it, but he sensed it. He saw it in the way she stood, in the softness of her voice, and the unwavering openness of her hand. She wasn't like the others. She carried her own kind of wound, and somehow she wasn't afraid of his. He didn't understand why, but he didn't want to hurt her. He only wanted to keep looking at her, to get closer, to understand what it was in her that felt so familiar. Hadn't trusted her yet, not fully. His pain ran too deep. His defenses were still strong, but something in her made him believe just a little that maybe not all humans were cruel. Bruno took another step, then paused. Lily slowly reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a few slices of apple, her favorite treat to carry for animals. She met her on town. She laid them gently on the ground at her feet and stepped back. She said nothing more. Bruno's nose twitched. He edged forward, sniffed, then carefully picked up a slice, his jaws huge but surprisingly gentle. He didn't growl, hadn't run. Instead, he sat not far from her, not close either, but close enough. He smiled. She didn't need to see him to know this was the beginning of something. "Good boy," she whispered, more to his soul than his ears. "I knew you were still in there." That night, after Lily returned home from the field, her grandmother Rose sat down with Sarah and Michael at the kitchen table, her voice trembling as she recounted everything she had witnessed. That'd be the time she finished. Both parents sat in stunned silence. She stood right in front of him. Michael asked, eyes wide, "And he didn't attack?" Sarah added, her voice barely above a whisper. Rosa nodded. Pennon didn't just not attack, he listened to her like he understood her. They were terrified. What parent wouldn't? But beneath the panic something Elsa stirred, because deep down they understood why Lily had done it. They had always known their daughter had a way with animals, a quiet magic, but this was something else. Something sacred, something born not of fearlessness, built of a heart so open. It made others want to soften too. Michael placed a hand over his wife's. She saw something in him just like she always does. Sarah didn't speak, but her eyes shone with a mix of fear, pride, and something close to awe. The next morning, Lily awoke with a quiet sense of purpose pressing against her chest. She turned to her parents over breakfast, her voice calm but certain. "I have to see Bruno again, please." Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. Fear was written all over their faces, but something in their daughters' stillness, sure, unwavering calm, convinced them. They agreed on the condition that they would stay with her the entire time. That afternoon, they returned to the old pasture behind the Miller farmhouse. The sky hung heavy with clouds, and the wind carried the faint rustle of dry grass. Bruno was there almost as if he'd been waiting. Lily stepped forward with slow measured steps, her cane tapping the earth as she moved. Bruno emerged from tall weeds, ears lifted, tail low. There was no growl, no aggression, just stillness. Sarah held Michael's hand tighter. "She's going too close," he whispered. "She knows what she's doing." Sarah replied, her voice thin with a well. Lily came to a stop only a few feet away from the giant dog. She tilted her head, listening. "Hi, Bruno," she said gently. "I came back just like I promised." They stood there, dog and child, wrapped in a silence that said more than words ever could. Bruno's breath was steady, his body relaxed. There was trust there, now unspoken, but completely reached her. Hand forward, palm open. "Can I touch you?" she whispered, shinched closer, holding her breath as her fingertips drew near the fur that sheckled and see, but somehow knew was right there. But just before contact was made, "There he is, don't move." Shouts rang out like thunder, the snapping crunch off boots over dirt, the sharp metallic clack off rifles. Sheriff Tom Bradley burst through the brush with two deputies. Rupert Morrison followed close behind, eyes sharp, jaw clenched. Bruno froze, his buddy locked his breath, turned short, then his gaze landed on Morrison, and something inside him broke open. Had no why, couldn't name it, but a storm surged inside him the moment their eyes met. His body remembered something. His mind didn't dread helplessness await pressing down without mercy. The field around him faded, time bent. His scroll deepened, not from hatred but from pain too old to explain. Lily felt it, aloft it, and suddenly the image of Bruno being shot flashed in her mind, and it shattered her. Just thinking about it made her chest ache like it might split in two. She didn't know why she cared so much, she couldn't explain it. She only knew that if Bruno died, if someone took him away from her now, something inside her would go quiet and never wake up again. She didn't think, she didn't fez it. She ran forward and threw herself between Bruno and the approaching men. "Stop," she cried out, arms spread. "Please don't hurt him." Bruno stood behind her, growling, trembling, breath heavy, still caught in storm of memory. Lily turned toward him again, her voice gentler, now cracking at the edges. "Bruno, it's okay, I'm here. You are not alone anymore." She slowly reached behind her open palm, turned toward him, not touching, just offering herself, offering trust, and then something shifted as Lily stood between him and fear itself. Bruno heard her voice like a thread of light through thefage. It was fragile, trembling, but it reached at him deeper than instinct, beyond Thesker's. He didn't understand why it moved him so deeply. He only knew that no one had ever stood for him before. Anosh was here, not running, not yelling, just standing. Her words wrapped around him like warmth he'd forgotten, and in that warmth he felt something stir, a connection tender and real between two broken souls. She was pulling him out from the dark, from the loneliness, and for the first time he let her. A soft whimper escaped Bruno's throat, a sound of surrender, of trust. Slowly he stepped forward and lowered his massive head, resting it gently against Lily's backfield. Held its breath. It wasn't just a dog choosing not to attack, it was a soul choosing to believe again. Michael couldn't believe his eyes. The dog that had kept an entire town in fear now stood perfectly still, resting his head gently against his daughter. Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming without permission. Sheriff Bradley lowered his rifle slowly, as if unsure whether what he saw was real. Even Robert Morrison, rigid pale, took a step back. "My God," someone whispered, "he's letting her touch him." No one moved, no one breathed too loudly, because in front of him the beast they all feared had come something else. Entirely vulnerable, quiet, almost gentle Bruno hadn't just calmed, he had chosen her. News of the moment spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. What hadn't been fear turned into wonder that they once called. A monster had chosen love, and the girl no one thought could see had seen more clearly them all since that day. Bruno never left Lily's side. He no longer growled at the sound of footsteps or flinched at sudden movements. The fear that once ruled his every breath had slowly unraveled, not through training, not through force, but through the quiet, unshakable presence of a little girl who had refused to give upon him. Robert Morrison stood outside the pasture fence the next morning, watching the unlikely pair rest side by side. In the tall grass, his voice was low when Heffenly spoke to Sarah and Michael. "I was wrong," he said, eyes fixed on Thedog he once called beyond saving. "I tried to break him when all he needed was Simeon to believe in him. He signed their lease papers that same day, let him stay with her. He's finally where he belongs, wherever Lily went." Bruno followed, not as a protector, but as a companion, a soul who had found his mirror in hers. They didn't speak the same language, but in the silence between them they both found home, and somehow in that quiet corner of Willow Creek the world learned that healing begins when someone chooses love over fear,